Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
A lot of these institutions too are in big cities, and the reality is not a lot of people can travel to experience the work themselves. And It's an invitation to see the work in person, but it's also an acknowledgement that not everyone can, make it to London or New York City to go to these particular institutions. And so it's a way of just sharing the work as generously as possible.
Today I'm joined by Caspar and Yujune Park, who together form the spellbinding Synoptic Office, a New York-based design, archival, educational agency. I don't have the words to describe them, but that's why they're joining me today, to clarify all things and take you inside their beautifully immersive world. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? I hope you're well. My name is Ben Talon. This is The Creative Condition. Welcome back to the show for all you lovely regulars, and welcome to you beautiful newcomers. It's a joy to have you on board. I hope you're good. Give me a shout. Let me know how you found the show. I'd love to hear from my listeners. If you're new to the show, I would love to hear your thoughts, because you catch me at a time when the show is kind of, what's the word? Morphing. It's morphing again. It's done this over the years. It's been 9 years now of doing this thing. And it changes all of the time, I think, sometimes to my detriment. But I'll tell you why it does, because I don't want to settle for it not being where it needs to be at any given time. And I think consistency is key, and consistency is something I've established in recent years with the brand. I finally locked down a brand that is cohesive. The website is going to show that off very soon. It will be launched in the next few weeks. I'm incredibly excited about crystallising 10 years of work, more than 10 years of work, in fact 11 years of work since I started interviewing people, but a lot longer if you take into account my lifelong love of creativity. But I'm rambling. So here we are. The reason I say it's changing is the last episode was the first entry in the Creative Condition diary, and I want to know your thoughts. I have had a smattering of feedback, and it's been incredibly positive, which is a massive boost. Because when you try something new, there's always that slight doubt that what it was before is going to be preferred. So what I decided to do was bear all, in a sense, in a way that's more vulnerable and more open and honest than ever before. Now, for anybody who's been with me for this whole ride, my first book, Champagne and Wax Crayons, Riding the Madness of the Creative Industries, which was kind of the gateway to all of this. It came off the back of the Express campaign, which I did for Campaign Against Living Miserably, a charity here in the UK that deals with the tragic suicide statistics, and particularly the male problem, which is about 3 to 1 for every female suicide. And so it was that, and then it was lecturing, and then it was Champagne and Wax Crayons, and then it was this podcast. I got started for the Creative Condition was I went on a Tumblr blog and vented my frustrations, and it wasn't just angry ranting, it was kind of about the realities of freelancing and the trials of a creative industry career, which has always been a little bit volatile and a little uncertain, more than a little uncertain, hence the starving artist stereotype, which I don't think is necessarily true, but it certainly has its challenges. And when I vented on that blog, it really resonated with people because it was very raw, it was emotional, it was honest, I put everything out there. And now with the Creative Condition book sandwiched in between, plus 300 plus episodes of this podcast, it felt like the right time to get back to that vulnerability again and start writing a diary on the site, which you're going to find very soon. And I trialled it in audio format for an episode last week, and the feedback was that it brought back that really knuckly humanity that shone through in Champagne and Wax Crayons more than the creative condition. And that's not a knock on the creative condition, it's just that Champagne was a memoir. It was a very honest memoir from somebody who was completely uncertain all the time, but had had these incredible highs that the creative industry gives you, because creativity is an extension of self. That's what I wanted to get back to, but in a new, slightly more grown-up manner, not because I'm more grown up. In some ways, I've degenerated maturity-wise. That's for sure. Ask anybody who knows me well, is in my private life, they'll tell you that. But I've learned a lot more about the human condition and about creativity, and my empathy is what's leading this creativity coaching that I'm doing through the Creative Condition brand. And I've fallen in love with it. So I wanted to take you on a ride of my day-to-day, week-to-week thoughts and introspections and learnings, because then when you get the big interviews on this show or in written form, or when you get me doing it live on a stage, it's going to mean that bit more. And I say that because I get that from other people who share their work in a more serial fashion and then punctuate that with big moments along the way. So that's what I'm going for. Let me know your thoughts. hello@bentalon.com. If you're new to the show, I recommend you get deep into the archive. Don't fall into under the illusion that the old episodes are in any way inferior. Some of those early episodes were so ragged and so honest that I love them to this day. And really, the human behind it hasn't changed. I always wanted to give that authenticity and not over-edit or produce or anything. So they're all a bit ragtag. They're all a bit punk, dare I say it. So head back. Number 1, for example, with Danny Allison is still one of my favourite interviews because it's just such a flow between us. And then number 2, Rebecca Johansson, a chance encounter with the professor of theatre at New York University, and we talk about spectacle and all this stuff, and it was an early indication of the breadth that I wanted to give this show, and I continue to do that to this day with today's guests, Yujune and Caspar from Synoptic Office. Before I go any further though, thank you to the guys who helped me get this started, who suggested it in the first place and have been there since day one. Illustration X, my representative in the illustration world as a practicing artist, supporter of the show, and a B Corp, an agency doing great work in the creative industries and beyond, helping to nail down legislation to protect us against AI. They're helping the likes of the Society of Artists Agents and the AOI, who also do great work to protect the creative industry. So show them some love, illustrationx.com, and maybe go and read their brilliant Trend X report, which brings you the front line of the illustration world through the eyes of the agents who are working it on a daily basis. I would also recommend, if you're an illustrator listening to this, going and checking out a good friend of mine, James, who runs the Illustrator's Guide. The YouTube channel is fantastic. I've been helping myself to a few of his videos recently, and even 17 years into the game, you can always learn. It doesn't matter if you're 60 years in, 17 years in, or 7 months in. James has got so much great content over there. He also works as an agent, but he's doing brilliant work in his own time, and the book, The Illustrator's Guide, is a gem. And I'm going to have him on the show at some point, which we've talked about, but I've just been a bit tardy in getting round to getting people on because of the work I'm putting into the website. So one little thing I thought I'd introduce at the start of each show is talking about how my creativity has been this week, and I would love some feedback on this from you guys because it changes all the time. And when I say creativity, I'm not talking about what jobs I've got on, what practice I'm doing. I'm talking about how's the human beneath all the creativity. This week, I've been pretty good. I'll be honest. I've been tightening my self-talk, my thought processes to nip those intrusive negative thoughts in the bud when they arrive. It's part of the reason I'm writing the diary, because it's a really great catharsis to put it all out there and hopefully get some feedback from you guys. I'm reading The Anxious Generation. I've just started it this morning and it's already cracked my brain in two. It's wonderful. It's Jonathan Haidt, who you might have seen on Stefan Sagmeister's The Happy Film. He's the professor from NYU. Psychologist doing incredibly important work, and his book The Anxious Generation is looking at social media, tech, the shift in the Gen Z, sorry for all the British people who want me saying Z. Yeah, it sounds good, doesn't it? Gen Z. It sounds better than Gen Z. Go on, we'll say Gen Z. Why not? Globalization and all that. But Jonathan is incredible. He's making the argument that overprotection in the real world and underprotection online has basically fucked up the mental health of a generation, hence the mental health crisis in young people. Sticking kids on tablets, do you know what I mean? And letting kids be on video games 24/7 and open access to the internet because it seems safer than letting them go outdoors, when actually it's a safer time than ever for kids to go and play out and learn life and do all that stuff. But instead, And we know the feeling of this as adults, so can you imagine what it's doing for kids? Instead, we're being bombarded by the adult world when we're really not ready for it, when our brains are biologically and scientifically proven to be not ready for it in adolescence, are being exposed to all of the world's ills. And that is hard enough when you were a fucking grown-up. I can tell you that. I've had my dips, I've had my crises, I have talked about on this show at length. He's looking at that. He's doing it brilliantly, and it's very disturbing. I'll be honest, it's very disturbing, and it's something we need to resolve. We need to get kids off devices ASAP if we're going to save another generation from being as fucked up as some of the last, because it's actually mental. Just go and read it. I'm going to put it on the creative condition reading list. But it's bonkers. And I'm not sitting here to tell people how to parent, because there's no exact science, no right or wrong to a degree with that. But I've always been innately aware of those screens, and I will admire. I'm such a Victorian dad when it comes to not letting them go on there any more than they have to learn a little bit of basic literacy here and there, or enjoy a bit of telly that is curated by us, because my word, I want to protect their innocence and let them experience the world in primary colours and touch and feel and play and make some mistakes and enjoy and learn how to be humans first and foremost. Then the screens can complement who we are as humans, as you and I, creative practitioners, will know fine well. They can be a great asset. I wouldn't be sat here talking to you today if that wasn't the case. Big fan of tech. However, God, you've got to learn how to be a human and be happy first. Anyway, a rant over. That's what I'm on this week. The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Check it out. I've also just finished The Nature Principle by Richard Louv. You could massively recommend those two as holding hands, as partners. They'd be a great double bookage for your Christmas list. So, double bookage. Do you hear that? Anyway, check them out. It's enough of that. Let's get to it. This week's guest, Synoptic Office, in their own words. This from their website, synopticoffice.com. Synoptic Office is an award-winning design agency founded by Caspar and Yujune Park. We work globally with leading cultural, civic and business organisations to communicate ideas, build experiences and cultivate new audiences. The studio's work has been honoured by Fast Company's Innovation by Design Awards, the Webbies, Design Week, the Art Directors Club, the American Institute of Graphic Arts, and now the Creative Condition. I'll add that one in there. Synoptic Office was selected to participate in Bio 23 and Bio 26, the Biennial of Design at the Museum of Architecture and Design in Ljubljana. They have exhibited in the Ningbo Museum of Art in China, the 26th International Biennial of Graphic Design in Brno, and at the Palazzo Mora with the European Cultural Centre in collaboration with the 2021 Venice Architecture Biennale. GD USA spotlighted Synoptic Office as a leader in socially responsible design for our working education and cultural heritage. In 2022, Caspar and Yujune Park were selected for Creative Review's Creative Leaders 50 list, which celebrates global leaders advancing in their field. Incredible agency, which I can't quite describe, which is why I wanted to talk to them today, because they have such a beautiful ecosystem of education, ideas, design, archiving practice, and just a love of human creativity and art. They were just optimum guests for this show, and I loved this chat as much as I have any chat I've done on this show. They're incredible people, lovely and warm, forthcoming with all their ideas, and I hope you get a lot out of today's show. Get in touch. I would love your feedback. hello@bentalon.com or ben@bentalon.com, the latest email address. I'm on LinkedIn. I might join Blue Sky. How's it been? Let me know. I've been talking to a mate on the dog walk this morning who reckons it's old Twitter. If that's the case, I might have to have a look, because I did like that interface. I just don't like what it's become. Anyway, enough of that. Please do tell a friend about the show. It's the best way you can help. If you have an extra few seconds, please click a little nice rating, review, subscription. It really helps. And I do put a lot into this show, so please help me out that way. The Creative Condition book is out now, and you can get it with the Anatomy of Creativity map of creativity. It's my framework that I use for coaching. You can pick up a copy for peanuts. £12.50 for a print, £6.50, the price of a pint. It might have been £6.80 because I go with inflation for the digital one. And it basically gives you 10 years of work, a structure of creativity. Get it. Cheers to Illustration X. Big thank you. Please go and support the Ukrainian Institute, ui.org.ua, who are helping creative Ukrainian people in a time of war, and you can help them too. Check out their artists, show them some love, share them, commission them, make a little action. It'll help you feel a better human. It will help people very much in need. Cheers, guys. Enjoy this conversation with Caspar and Yujune from Synoptic Office.
I was born in Mississippi in the deep south in the U.S. I was first generation immigrant, born here in the US. And I think, like a lot of maybe immigrant children, art is not something that's necessarily emphasized when you're growing up. I think jobs that are much more practical are kind of things that are emphasized. But what I was fortunate that when I was in high school, there was a little bit of a schedule shift my sophomore year, and I used to play the violin, and it was orchestra didn't fit my schedule anymore. And so I had one more class I had to fill. And the only thing that really fit my schedule was an art class. So I actually started exploring the arts quite late in life. I think compared to a lot of other professional designers. So I took an art class and I just loved it. And I guess the rest is history.
What do you think? Just to jump in on that a little bit, I'm very interested in the kind of roots of that, the cultural reluctance to encourage artistic practice, because it's something I come across time and again. And for people from different backgrounds, this comes up, but I think it's quite universal in some respects. And I personally think that emanates from the immovable presence of the unknown in terms of creativity. Do you think that might be the case? And it's very interesting to me.
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is that the creative life, you are signing up a little bit for a life of the unknown, right? There's so many different ways creativity can be expressed, and the pathway is not always clear. And sometimes you have to forge your own path. And so I think there's an inherent risk in that. And even, as a mother now, you think of your own children, right? And you want them to thrive in life. You want them to be able to turn the lights on and have a place to live. And so even if it seems like a double standard, but if my child came up to me and said, I really want to be an artist, I would support them 100%, but inside I would be a little bit nervous because I think in some ways it can be a harder path.
100% agree. I'm a father of two twins, and I have this conversation regularly with other design and artist friends who have children. And, time and again, we say, like, cards on the table, would you recommend this? And I said, it depends when you catch me. If you catch me on a low week, no. But I'm a big believer that whatever path they take, that creativity is something that just illuminates a life. So, but then that's a different conversation. And how about you, Caspar?
No, absolutely. I mean, I have a similar sort of background as Yujune. Also, my family is immigrants, and I think growing up, the idea of being a designer or even an artist was very unappealing to my parents. I think, I mean, honestly, thinking back, one of the earliest sort of indications that I might be going down this path was really playing with paper, because my father would used to bring sort of stacks of office supplies from his workplace, and I mean, at the time I didn't realize it, but he was an engineer, and so they actually used Prismacolors. They used all sorts of different papers, drafting rulers, all of these types of things, and those were sort of form a very sort of powerful memory in terms of my childhood, because those are the things that I played with growing up. And sort of going to class, and in school they might ask you to use like crayons or pastels or colored pencils, and I had always thought I always thought to myself, why do these materials don't work as well? It never worked as well as say Prismacolors. And then it was only much later that I realized, oh, Prismacolors, they're actually made of something that's very different than your regular crayons or your colored pencils and things like that. And it was really then that it really started to sort of form this deep impression in my mind that there is this sort of sensitivity to materials, especially paper. I loved sort of doing origami and folding things and doing all sorts of things with paper, because it was just a lot of fun, and so that kind of really bolstered. It felt very natural to be drawn towards design, because those were the materials that you worked with.
Yeah, it's very. I'm fascinated by this concept of what I refer to as conduits of creativity, and then that can take on the shape of anything. It can be a place, it could be a toy, you know. But in childhood, when we approach these things with a real naivety and natural curiosity, I used to share a studio in Manchester, and it was just down the corridor from a guy called Micah Purnell, and his dad worked in the Catholic Church, and Micah tells a story of kind of being exposed to this biblical language, and then a combination of this, and then him kind of spelling out his name very meticulously and ordered with alphabet spaghetti, and and then starting to build these phrases. And I find that really interesting. What those first encounters with kind of objects that really tap into something on a deep level that only with hindsight can we identify consciously. But that natural childhood gravitation towards these tools, in your case, the Prisma pens, I always find it a really, really beautiful seeing what people's earliest roots are in that regard.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I think it still forms a large part of our consciousness too. I mean, we love working with books and printed materials, but that has design just keeps on changing, and so we find ourselves working more, digitally, even though we have this sort of deep longing of maybe just wanting to work with paper and the printer.
I mean, I feel lucky in a lot of ways because even though maybe my parents didn't imagine that I would go into a creative field when I was young, they actually gave a lot of space for creativity. In a way, I think sometimes kids now don't have because everything is so overprogrammed. They have all these activities after school, everything is kind of dictated. But I felt like growing up, I had a lot of time to just play. In the summer, your parents give you just some like printer paper and you have time to just draw. Or my dad, he was also an engineer and would bring home like robot parts and he would like let us build our own like little plastic robots at home. And I think that's one of the reasons I kind of sometimes approach things in a little bit of a systematic manner. And I think that comes from him. So we had a lot of time to just explore, to make something or not make something.
Yeah, the active, not boredom, that's probably the wrong word, but active kind of idling and exploration is really important. And it does concern me that the pace of today's world and the sheer raft of information that, young people have access to, I wonder what the permutations of that will be down the line. But, we can't know that yet. But I think it's really important, especially now as adults in this too much world, because let's face it, I think a lot of people in our industry gravitate towards the industry partly because of a deep sensitivity and an awareness of the world around them. And if that is constant bombardment, I think that's why a lot of people burn out or lose their way a little bit.
I think boredom is really important when you're a child. I actually think perhaps it forces you to be creative.
It does, yeah. I spoke to a lady from UNICEF recently, and she spoke of that was very much her most creative time, is when there was nothing going on. She was a little bit bored, and then, of course, the unconscious begins to do what it does best.
No, absolutely, and then also like a slower pace of just being with things, being with the objects around you. I think also helps develop that sensitivity. I think a lot of times I mean, I also have two young children, and there's always this constant need for stimulation. And yes, you may be sort of engaged or excited about a particular thing, but actually doesn't allow your mind to wander or to look around and actually notice and observe things, which is actually a really big part of being creative.
When did you guys meet then, and what are the early threads of Synoptic Office?
I'll let Casper take that.
I mean, I think we have also very vivid memory, or at least I do. So we both met at grad school, and we actually had sort of ran into each other when I was going in for my interviews. So Yujune was in grad school in a 3-year program, and I went to the 2-year program, and so she was already there, and we had run into each other as I was going into my interview, and I think Eugene, you said this to me. I looked extremely nervous, and I mean, I was. I mean, because I didn't sleep very well. The hotel I stayed at was not very nice. I mean, I just didn't know anything. I didn't know the location or anything, so just kind of showed up, just hoping things would go well. And I remember Eugene being very kind and said, "Oh, everything will be fine." And I thought, "Oh, that's so cool. I wish I could be here too." and so that was the first time we met, and of course later we became classmates, and then I think we both had this idea of going to grad school to find somebody to start a studio with or to have some sort of practice with. I think actually now that looking back on that, that's a very kind of naive notion. Especially when I tell my students, like, what do you want to do after graduation? They say, oh, I want to go work at Google and earn lots of money. But for for me, it was I think for both of us, it was oh, let's go to grad school, maybe find somebody to start a practice with and have a studio, and that's the path. And that's really how Synoptic got started. Was from that kind of idea.
Yeah, tell us about what you do today.
Yeah, I mean, so we primarily use design and storytelling as a vehicle to help organizations and institutions make human connections. And so for us, what that means is oftentimes working in the cultural sector, in the civic sector, with these large institutions that have so much power and knowledge and information right at their disposal that they're trying to communicate to the general public, but oftentimes sometimes it's successful, and sometimes it's not. And so we our studio, we use these elements of storytelling and design to really help them kind of bridge that gap, and partially it's because of our own sort of backgrounds. We teach, we're in an academic space, but we are also designers, so we kind of understand the kind of two different cultures that exist, right? That the institutions have a type of way of thinking, way of doing things, and the public, the general public, also has a way of thinking and a way of doing things. And when you put those two things together, you suddenly find that you need somebody to translate that and make those bridges. And so that's what we do as a design studio, to try to use design and storytelling to make those connections.
Absolutely. I think one thing that kind of makes our studio unique is that we really see research and practice going hand in hand. And one of the great things about kind of being rooted in an academic environment is you're always asking yourself where design is going to be in the future, 5-10 years out. By nature, university is a space that's future facing, because you're preparing students to practice design, 5 years from now. And so it's kind of a way to kind of ask these questions about where things are moving with AI, with institutions trying to become borderless, all the big questions that our kind of field is facing. We can begin to explore those things in an academic environment. And then on the flip side, I think our practice is a great way for us to kind of ask these questions and try to answer them in the present moment, right? It's really responding to the needs of today. And so with all of our clients, what we're really doing is, a lot of times with cultural institutions, we're trying to help them become borderless institutions. That's a need that they have today, and it was accelerated by the pandemic, right? They have a physical space, but they're also really they preserve knowledge, and their mandate is to actually share that. And if you really look at their mandate in a more holistic way, it's like maybe design can help them fulfill their mission through digital technologies, for example. And so our practice is a way to kind of address how design lives in the world today and how it can play a really important role in making knowledge more accessible.
It's something you said in a I don't know if essay is the right term, but it was a letter to a design student I was reading, and I love that so much. And there was a couple of lines I pulled from it, but one you just made me think of there with the future facing thing, and it was, your parents love you for who you are, we love you for who you will be. And I just thought, that's powerful, that's great writing. And it's so true, because we're all kind of these naive young things when we arrive at design school, and kind of get taught to think differently and to explore and really go deep on ideas, or at least that's the hope. And that was magic. It's a really great way of distilling it. And yet borderless is interesting too. I wonder, something that's a recent thread on this show has been looking at the class ceiling. I've had a lot of people from working class backgrounds, which is what my background is. And I often think of galleries and museums in that regard, because unfortunately for a lot of working class people, access to those spaces is not such a common thing. When I guess when families' priorities putting food on the table, it has a way of restricting that. Do you think that the kind of work you're doing to translate this into a digital space and help them achieve their goals is something that can benefit people from not just those backgrounds, but from other marginalized backgrounds who might also have struggled to access culture?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the definition of culture has shifted a lot, especially since the Enlightenment. I mean, if you want to go back hundreds of years, um, the especially now when we are living with different ways of communications, right? The way that we receive information is not only from books or kind of these a little bit more static media. It's dynamic media. It's changing and it's in front of you and it comes to you. Now I think maybe that's part of the reason why we were speaking about these things about creativity earlier is that rather than us going to seek the information now is coming to people, and they're both good and bad things related to that. But because of that, cultural institutions, if they view themselves as people coming to them, then that actually turns the equation sort of upside down, right? That people, because they're so used to the information coming to them, they're not going to go and actually seek those things. And so, becoming a borderless museum actually helps diffuse that knowledge out into society a little bit better than perhaps if one were to think about, oh, all the visitors are going to come to the museum and that there's no sort of reciprocal kind of outreach. And so that's why we talk a lot about museums and these institutions becoming borderless as a way of reaching as many people as possible right where they are.
What role does archiving, how much archiving do you tend to do on it? I guess it fluctuates between projects, but tell us about that process. That's very fascinating to me.
Yeah, so in terms of our past work and the organizations that we tend to work with, they usually have a very large repositories of information, and we kind of got into this space because sort of earlier in my career, I worked for a nonprofit that had basically designed digital cataloging software for different institutions, and you start to learn more about how libraries and archives work. And there is definitely a science and sort of theory behind how you organize and categorize things. And then there's the practical aspect of having computers hold that information in a particular way that's safe and that's accessible. And then there's a third part, which is probably the hardest part, is taking those data structures, taking that information that's all been put neatly into, in the past it was card catalogs and now it's computers, and taking that and making it accessible and interesting to the average user that is trying to access that. And so, of course, you have different types of users, right? Everybody from an academic who'll be more patient with trying to move through that information to somebody who just wants to visit a museum or just wants to learn something and doesn't really want to bother with all of the different types of kind of overhead that's been loaded onto the data. And so in our work, what we always do when we approach these institutions and in terms of sort of archiving and cataloging and metadata is that we're always looking at the data that the organization comes to us with. And then we are thinking, well, how can we translate that data in a way that makes it more accessible to the average person? Because the average person doesn't care about kind of all the loaded, which is why it's called metadata. It's data about data. They don't really care about all the data that's been attached to a name, to an object. They just want to see that object or see that information in relation to the things that they understand in the world. And so that by necessity asks for a lot of translation and a lot of thinking about how we can meet those needs while also preserving the quality and the necessary rigor that comes with trying to organize this type of information. So for us, that's a very interesting challenge.
I think, we work a lot with amazing archivists at all of these institutions, and they have a mandate to preserve this data and to do it meticulously. And we have tremendous respect for the work that they do. I think where we come in is really about access and activation.
Mhm.
And so these archives, which are the heart of these cultural institutions, can be really hard to access without kind of having knowledge of the field, without knowing the keywords to search for. There's sort of barriers to accessing that knowledge. And all these institutions, they truly want to reach as many people as possible. That is really the heart of these organizations. And so our role is, how do you make this knowledge accessible, and not like kind of how do you activate it through design? So that means telling the human stories behind these objects. Like, you go somewhere like MoMA and it feels like a rarefied space, but at the end of the day, this art was made by flesh and blood human beings who have
Mhm.
interesting things to say. And when you encounter the works, the greatest hope is that it will invite you to see the world in a new way. And so I think our job is to kind of bring it back to that human connection, and technology can really play a role in that, in terms of taking all this data and kind of weaving it with storytelling to reach audiences in new ways.
And I guess that ultimately the two, not two formats because it's more than two, but the difference in formats from digital archiving to the rarefied spaces, that was a lovely way to put it, by the way. That's the two have to be cyclical, do they not? I guess symbiotic would be a better word, but it's because ultimately, I love the experience of being in those grand spaces and getting that. That's a lovely gift to have that. But ultimately, why sit on that, and why not take that out to others? Because if you do that, then surely there's going to be a percentage of those people that will want to come and see it in that space too. So everybody wins. Is that the thinking here?
I think so. I
Yeah, I
think,
think so.
yeah. I mean, that's definitely part of it. I think sometimes the answer to that is also maybe a little bit more banal because day to day. I mean, most cultural institutions, I would say almost all of them are overworked, understaffed, under-resourced. Right? They have so many things to do that they're just overwhelmed with being keepers of this information, keepers of this knowledge. And so when your day to day is actually just trying to make sure that your files don't don't get wet, and you want to make sure to preserve things for the next generation, that kind of downstream to that is this kind of public engagement, which is, even though it's a high priority, in reality, in the grand scheme of things, it becomes sort of one amongst many different sort of things to compete for resources for. So that's definitely been one thing that we've seen in
Yeah,
working
and
with a lot of
I think on a
organizations.
very practical level, a lot of these institutions too are in big cities, and the reality is not a lot of people can travel to
Yeah,
experience the work themselves. And
exactly.
it's an invitation to see the work in person, but it's also an acknowledgement that not everyone can, make it to London or New York City to go to these particular institutions. And so it's a way of just sharing the work as generously as
Mhm.
possible.
And on the
Yeah,
flip side too, there are many institutions in rural areas that are
Mm.
desperate for audiences, right? And that's
Yeah.
that's also the same problem that they face. And so there's it's a universal problem.
yeah, yeah. No, it's true. I mean, growing up, I grew up in a small former mill town, and it just wasn't. There wasn't. It wasn't on offer. It was, and this was pre-internet, of course. So really, you relied on either an accidental mentor in the form of a teacher or somebody else who was more clued up, or your parents. And not everyone's parents had access to that either, because they had even less reach, going back into the 60s and the 50s. And so I do find it's very interesting, actually, yeah, that these tools can be, can turn the tide almost in that regard. And also, I think as we move forward, with the advent of things like AI and the power that brings for the more perhaps uh, banal tasks, maybe that, again, wrong word, but human curation here is really important, isn't it, too? Because I read a brilliant book recently called Filter World by Kyle Chaker, who writes for the New Yorker. And it's about how algorithms are flattening culture. So in some regards are being funneled down these very narrowed sources of inspiration. I see this as a potential counter to that, which, because this is curated, this has the love of professionals such as yourselves working in conjunction with galleries. So by the time it reaches an end user, it's not just lumped on Pinterest or on TikTok. It's hopefully arriving in this beautifully curated form.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that's something we talk a lot with our students about is sort of their algorithmically driven visual universe. And I think the hope is that rather than your point of view getting more and more narrow, that we're trying to expand it through things, yeah, through partnerships, through cross-linking, through a more thoughtful curation. I think it is an issue though, because we see, for example, so many of our students who get all of their inspiration from only Instagram, for example, all their visual inspiration, or even worse, Pinterest. And it's kind of I think in some ways, the wrong use of these platforms. Like I feel like Instagram would be much more, I think, impactful as sort of a phone book as a way to connect with designers and makers around the world than as like a coffee table book. To use a print analogy where you just like look through 10 beautiful images. Like I would like to kind of, I don't have the answer, but it would be nice to find ways to kind of help all organizations, ourselves and our students have a broader, I think, perspective outside of the algorithmically driven feed that we spend so much time looking at.
I mean, context is really important because it's only with context that the data or the information actually becomes something that's useful. That's a knowledge or story, right? And that's actually is the part that has meaning to us as human beings. Otherwise, it's just some random numbers or random images on a board that is just totally kind of abstract and floating in space, and it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't have any impact or power or any hold on the imagination. And so part of sort of this idea of curation, of storytelling, and understanding history is really about providing that context so that even if you're looking at a toilet, right, that suddenly it has some meaning because it has affected people or has done something in history, right? If you were to look at a toilet out on the street, that's very different than looking at it from Marcel Duchamp's toilet. And so it's or urinal, and so it's totally, the context of it actually becomes the driving force of us understanding the world and having these ideas sort of put into different boxes so that we can actually understand things.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the platforms that we build, a big goal is just providing context around things because so much information is consumed on social channels now. What we're also hoping to do is invite people to a deeper experience with the work and maybe even a multi-sensory one using technology.
Yeah, and meaning and storytelling. I mean, it's the very advent of human culture, isn't it? That's what separates us from other species, that enables us to form cultures in the first place, because I forget the exact number, but I think it's 150 people that they say you can truly know and have in your circle. And then beyond that, you kind of need a narrative and a myth or a belief, hence religion, hence other things. But yeah, and that kind of banal reframed, it's a massive thing for me in my own practice. I have a book of short stories where I pulled 21 items that I found commonly on the British streets, everything from a traffic cone to a hubcap that's come off a car to a cigarette butt, and I told a flash fiction story around each item. And a part of my will to do that was to try to get people to see a little more magic in the everyday and the places they go and the things that they see. Because when you learn that trick of the imagination, it just, it brings meaning to everything you do. No matter how many times you've done that walk, you can kind of set these little challenges. And I guess to draw on your lecturing side of things, this must be something that you try to instill in your students. And I remember many battles going on, in those first couple of years when we weren't ready to see that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our early assignments for students, we do ask them to look at things, to collect things, to look at them, because initially students, I mean, it always baffles a fair amount of students when we say, okay, go out and make a collection, collect some things and make a collection that is interesting. And that is actually a very, very hard assignment. They might, collect postcards or whatever is in their dorm rooms or things, and you suddenly, sit down and you talk to him and you realize, that object that at first you think maybe the most interesting is maybe the least interesting, and it's the things that you have overlooked, or that are maybe quite common, that has some particular visual quality or perhaps some idea attached to it, that actually is the most interesting object, not the flashiest or the shiniest thing. And so this type of exercise we actually always do with our students to try to get them to start to look at the world in a different way.
Yeah, I remember an assignment we had on the first year of my illustration degree, which was to draw the same object 100 times. And
Yes.
it's very obvious.
That sounds like a very art school.
Yeah, yeah, very much just they give you two choices: you either die of boredom or you draw that thing differently.
Absolutely.
Which is great. So what is the balance between, because you guys teach at Parsons, is that right?
Yes,
that's correct. Mm-hmm.
So what is the split of commitments there, and how do you make that work?
It's always, I would say it's never like a 50-50 or a 30-70. I think it just fluctuates across the year. But I would say we really see our design practice, our teaching, and our writing as all being one practice. They all go together. You bring your expertise from the industry into the classroom. You bring the things that you're learning from being in a university setting, all the future facing questions that you're asking, and then you bring that back out into your work. And then we write, we publish all of the things that we're learning. We share it through publishing. We try to do this in collaboration with other designers, thinkers around the world. And I think ultimately the practice is it's just putting ideas out there holistically through kind of these three things.
It's meant to be cyclical. I mean, that's the way that we usually sort of draw it or think about it in our own minds, of that, as Yujune was saying, right? It's not doing one thing and it's suddenly, okay, let me drop this and then do something else. It's meant to flow together. It's meant to feed into each other. And even, we've noticed our colleagues who perhaps don't teach, they do this on their own too, but in their own way, right? They might be working on their design job, but then they have these other inspirations or outlets for other types of creativity and thinking, and that feeds back into their everyday jobs. And so for us, we've just kind of made it a little bit more formal, or perhaps a little bit more distinct, where these types of juggling acts or these cyclical processes are actually part of how we operate as a designer, as a teacher, as writers and researchers.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I very much have that same thing going on, and I've always allowed my curiosity to lead me, which there are some times when I sit there and I think, what are you doing? You pay your bills with illustration. You should be marketing to illustration clients. But invariably, I find myself off researching some obscure thread of creativity or photographing rubbish in the park. But the reason I don't stop myself is exactly what you just described there. It's that cyclical feel of flow. And it's something that I get, and I can't always find the language to justify that. I can't explain it to anyone, but it just feels right. And I don't know if you guys get this too, but I heard it recently described as invisible hands by educator and writer Joseph Campbell, who said, when you follow your bliss, doors will open and people will come into your sphere. And I find that to be completely true when you follow that passion. So I wonder if you guys feel those same invisible hands and that kind of enough to give you the trust to keep on going, even though sometimes logic wants to grab that,
I think so. I mean, I think the Greeks would call it the muses, right? But obviously, I mean, especially with children, since we both have young children, there are actually, a lot of practical things that intrude into that space. And so for us, as we sort of, as this practice has grown and has matured over the years, we've found ourselves juggling not only this kind of cyclical process, but also allowing for our children and families and family life to kind of sort of be part of that cyclical spinning as well, so to speak.
And I think a big part of the creative life is active making, but it's also just making space to be still and to ask questions. and to let ideas come back to you. And so the classroom is an amazing space to let that happen, right? It's like you take a 2-hour pause from active making to just take a step back, and with your students within a community of makers to just ask the questions, and to see if it can kind of deepen your understanding of something or kind of help you see something in a new way.
Completely. Yeah. And it's true. It's always the yin and the yang, isn't it? You have to have that negative space and that kind of, it can take on many forms: procrastination, idling, term it however you want. But if it's go, go, go all of the time, then as I mentioned earlier, the unconscious can't do its job. And then you don't get those truly grand ideas or those big breakthrough moments.
It's like
No,
Steve Jobs,
absolutely.
he had that big thing with thinking through walking, right? You have to have these moments.
Yeah, you do. And I find cleaning the bathroom is quite a good one for that, which is, my wife thanks me for that, but it's,
I find washing dishes to be very comforting, actually.
that's another one I do too.
The same thing. Yeah, yeah.
So I wonder if we could just touch upon a couple of your projects, just to give us a sort of sense of how, a project that involves archiving and a lot of moving parts, how that looks from the outset. I was going to sort of name a couple. I know there's obviously like the Tremaine and things, but actually I think it's better for you guys to talk about one that you feel good about talking about today. So you lead.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Tremaine Foundation project is actually a really great example. We've worked with the foundation for I think a couple of years now, right? Even it's been quite a while, and they have a very interesting history because the foundation, the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, started by its namesake, Emily Hall Tremaine. She was a art collector in the 50s, during a time when there weren't that many female art collectors. I think the only person who could rival her was Peggy Guggenheim, of the Guggenheim Museum and collection and things like that. And so Emily had amassed this extraordinarily large collection of modern masterworks. So everything from Andy Warhol to Jasper Johns, Mondrian's Victory Boogie Woogie, the diamond shaped painting that's quite famous, at least to design students. It's like a seminal work. She was the one that discovered that, and had friendships with all these different artists like Bridget Riley and Louise Nevelson. And when the foundation was started, the family basically took the collection, had auctioned it off or donated it, and to start the foundation. And the foundation is now used to help support living artists and other types of causes. And so recently they had approached us with this very interesting proposition of, well, we would like to bring the collection back together. And for us, we thought, oh, yes, that sounds great. What does it actually mean then? And the reason for that was most organizations that we work with, or actually most museums, all museums, they have their own permanent collections, right? They have the physical object, they have the data, everything is held by them. And in this case, the family has, of course, family records and things like that. But they had actually donated all of that to the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian actually has their family papers, namely all papers, which is the sixth most used collection in the Archives of American Art. And so it's pretty significant, but they have all of that in the archives. The family doesn't have the artworks anymore, right? They've been donated or sold. And so the question really was for us, how would we bring those things back together again? And so for us, it was a really interesting one because you're not producing a traditional catalog raisonné. That doesn't make sense in this context. You're not producing a collections website like a museum because you don't have the works. It's not really an archive because you don't even have the papers. The papers are at another institution. But what you do have is you have family memory. You have the some of the data in the papers that the that were current when the family owned the artwork. And so for us, it meant piecing together a lot of that information so that we could show that history of when those works were in the family. And then more importantly, to weave stories around those works so that we could get a sense of how the family, and especially Emily Hall Tremaine, how she had interacted with the works and the artists, and to really highlight that legacy that is the most important part of sort of all of these different things. So rather than focusing on the objects, we decided to focus on those stories that were surrounding the objects.
In some ways, it's kind of an abstract, like an interpretation of maybe like a digital, sort of like a digital museum, where what you're doing is taking all of these things that are scattered around the world and bringing them into a digital space together. And part of the work was kind of formatting, creating a information architecture that would power the site, that would help people discover these works in new ways. But it's also a way of, it was an intentional decision to interweave these family memories and these artist stories with the work and to show them on the same level. And what's really exciting and I think visionary about Emily Hall and Burton Tremaine was that they were ahead of their times. When they started collecting work from Andy Warhol, Louise Nevelson, they made friendships with these artists before they were big, when a lot of the art world looked down on their work. And they said, especially Emily, she saw the vision in the work. And when they bought a piece by them, the rest of the art world looked and took notice. And so we have these extraordinary stories, and we highlight all this ephemera that lets you hear from the artists themselves, like Andy Warhol's own insecurities about how people perceive his work, or Louise Nevelson when she was depressed because sculptures weren't selling well, and you see a letter from Emily Hall Tremaine encouraging her. Like, these things are kind of interwoven with the works, because ultimately their collection really captures, through a series of key works, sort of the birth of modernism. That's what their collection is really known for. And so by reading all of these like letters and seeing these photographs, you kind of, it's like a little window into a moment of art history that was really significant.
That's phenomenal. And I think in some ways we're looking at an early version of kind of stepping out of the algorithm, aren't we? In that courage to take a chance on something that's not a part of the popular zeitgeist. That's great. That still takes pioneer and brave thinking, and someone to commit to something that has not yet been given the mainstream nod of approval. That's beautiful. And I also imagine that for you guys, this really brings richness to the project on a different level when you get to hear those stories and immerse yourself in that whole lived experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's quite magical to encounter some works that you've read in a textbook, and then you suddenly find out that this was the collector that discovered it, and there's this amazing backstory behind it, and it suddenly makes the things in the textbook that you've encountered as a student makes it come alive and so much more meaningful.
Or even hearing like the story of Victory Boogie Woogie, the iconic Mondrian piece, she bought he died before he finished it. And Emily Hall Tremaine saw the brilliance in the work with the tape. It still had the masking tape on it. And she saw that it was complete and that there was a vision in it, and kind of bought that last work. Or you think of Andy Warhol, when people didn't take him seriously and they bought a few pieces from him, and he was so thankful. On Christmas Day, he left him one of those iconic Maryland silk screens on their doorstep, just to thank them for collecting his work and seeing the vision behind it. And so that's all, like, it's just nice to kind of realize that behind these works are very human stories, and these artists you see them struggling to also see the world in a new way, and to show that in their own work.
And now you're adding to that story, that must be a great feeling, for people who care about good design and good art, to be an ongoing link in that chain and a part of keeping that story alive, and maybe not just keeping it alive, but giving it a whole new resonance and cultural relevance.
I think we play a small part. I think the main part is Emily's brilliance, and obviously the foundation and the family's
art and the brilliance of the artist,
of
trying to preserve that legacy. I mean, For us, we're just very happy to be bystanders and just to be privileged of being able to just work with the material because, sometimes we also get distracted reading through their papers and, we're supposed to be designing, but then you get carried away by, there's a telegram from Emily, to a curator saying, the painting's hung upside down, please correct it immediately. It's like these things that you never see behind the scenes that actually make it so much fun. And yeah, it's been a real privilege being able to work with them on this. Yeah.
It goes without saying, you must be passionate to do this because it sounds like rigorous work too. And this was another thing I pulled from your letter to a design student. I thought, there's passion is a fire that consumes your waking moments and obsession that drives you forward. And the sort of passion starting as a spark and then being fanned by attention. This stuff I've been doing for 10 years, it started very much as, just interest in something that was going on. And, in its first incarnation, threw myself in the deep end with nothing to lose. But then it's that classic thing then where 10 years down the road, it's become a very large chunk of what I do now. So, being mindful of that as lecturers and also in the work that you do, do you take conscious steps to keep in variation in the projects you take on, for example, to keep maintaining that passion?
I think we try to. I mean, we always have this mental model of the types of projects that we want to pursue and to try to balance them. It's obviously not a perfect equation, or it's not always 50-50, 70-30 type of thing. It's but we always are asking ourselves, what are the projects that are appropriate for us for a variety of reasons. And can we do a good job and to do right by the partners that we work with, and at the same time, is it interesting and does it allow us to explore new ideas and all of these different factors? And so these are always things that we speak about inside the studio of thinking about the types of work that we are encountering and doing.
And how do you feel about the kind of, I don't know anything about the state of play with creative education in the States. In the UK, it's taken a real battering. The last sort of government really didn't care too much and kind of stripped it out of the core subjects in the curriculum, which has led to a lot of going back to the working class things, to working class and marginalized backgrounds not being taught self-expression, not being given access to dance and drama and the arts. What do you see kind of over there in the States? Are things in a good place? Are there things you'd wish to see change?
I would just say a very general. It is all over the place. I would just say that in general, the U.S. has not cared about art education too much. Neither has it really cared, nor has it not cared. It's just kind of left to its own. It hasn't gone through those swings. Let me put it that way. We are definitely. I remember this very vividly in grad school. We are definitely not like the Dutch or the Swiss at that time. They were providing massive amounts of funding for the arts, right? And the United States has never been like that. At the same time, it's not, the United States is not like some other countries which just doesn't care about the arts. It's just kind of left to its own devices. I think it's fairly average, left to its own devices and left to the economy, really, which is both a good and a bad thing.
It really shifts like state to state and even county to county, because a lot of it is based off of funding, which is based off of property tax. For better or for worse, the U.S. there is extreme range in terms of resourcing across different school districts and areas of the country.
Yeah, no, there is a degree of that here in the UK, and I think industry's kind of working out now, how to sort of rally and help to build those links to industry. So, to try and be a part of that through doing these kind of conversations is exciting. But yeah, it's like you say, it's, this goes back to the earlier bit of the conversation about kind of parental guidance, doesn't it? It's very much still held as this outlier and this thing that oh, I don't quite understand that. So, oh, there's this fear around it.
I do think on a
Absolutely.
university level, Parsons is really trying, though, to make an art education more accessible. So we have various programs like Parsons Scholars Program for high school students, where they get to come and take classes for free at the university. And so I think that there is real concerted effort amongst individual institutions to really open up this treasure trove of resources we have to as many people as possible.
That's really cool. That's a great thing to do for high school students. And yeah, and it can only take one tiny moment. That's the thing, I didn't connect with anything at school, and I remember being given a list of. I don't know if you guys do work experience in the States, but we at 15, we go and do 2 weeks of work experience to, I guess find out what the working world is like. And I just rejected everything on the list. I had no interest in it, and ultimately it was the woodworking teacher. He was the first person outside of my parents to ask me what I'd liked to do, and when I told him that I liked to draw, he called up the local art college and he got 4 of us to go down there and sit on the desk for 2 weeks and draw, and we got given access to all the different things. And I just immediately fell in love with the place. It only took walking through that door and to sense that energy to change everything for me. And I went running back down there after I finished school, and there it began. But so it doesn't take a lot. So I think institutions like Parsons doing things like that will change lives. I think that's really great to hear.
And it does take, even for me, like I wasn't even going to go to art school. Like there was, as part of my high school, you can take classes at the local university and you have last priority in registration. So the only empty seats were in an etching class in my senior year. And it didn't even dawn on me to apply to art school. And the professor actually ordered the catalogs for me and took images of my work and encouraged me to apply. And like, if he hadn't done that, I would be in a totally different field right now. It was almost accidental.
Yeah. And this is one of my one of my battles, or my points of battle that I want to work on, is that it's a little too left to chance. And, I've got stories also like that where I benefited from that, but I want it to be less, I want a little more structure so that that still happens. And that always has to happen to a degree, but then it'd be nice if there was a little more framework. But I could go all day about that. I'm not going to bore
Absolutely.
listeners. But yeah. Well, look, I think I've covered just about everything. This has been wonderful. If you guys do you have any books out?
We do have some books out. One is Ming Romantic Collected and Bound. We have 2 editions. The first one is in print. The second one is published through Library Stack and then Contemporary Art. So that's widely available. As an ebook. We've also submitted a lot of chapters to recent kind of textbooks. So one is
Ellen Lupton's Thinking with Type is a design classic for typography. We have a chapter in there.
Also,
there's
Karina
also
Salas' book Centered, which presents kind of more global perspectives on design. So we also contributed to that.
That's great news.
This coming year, there will be another book on typography. So the Bloomsbury Global Type Handbook. So we've also written a chapter there as well. So
wonderful. I only asked because there was, just through reading the pieces on your website, they're just very magnetic and fantastically written. So it was making me hungry for a good chunk of that. So
that's very kind.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for taking the time today, guys. And and I will share all the links. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much,
Ben. Thank you for having us. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. And let's keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Does that agency not make you want to have a practice that's in a massive library with ladders leading up to shelves that are 20 shelves high, full of books and design on the walls and little workstations? And I'm going off on one, but I've been doing the vision exercise with my coaching clients, and I'll tell you what, the ecosystem those guys have through educating and design and ideas and art, I don't know the realities. Maybe just like me and other people, they're struggling for cash and it's more stressful than it looks from the outside looking in, but that's a bit of a dream, isn't it? I hope you loved that. I love talking to Caspar and Yujune. Massive thank you for the guys from Synoptic Office for taking the time out to talk to me. It never gets old. talking to people from cool agencies in New York and across the world and all that. And I am a bit of a... In the wrestling world, we call them marks. That's like doting fans who are hanging on the every move in the wrestling ring. And I'm a design mark. I'll go there, I'll be honest. I love it. I was speaking at Arts University Bournemouth just this Friday, and I had a great day. I fell in love with the campus quite quickly. They've got such awesome kit, printing presses, a plotter. Have you ever come across a plotter? It's this tool where you feed in digital mapped drawings and you stick a pen in a little hole and it plots out the digital drawing with whatever pen you want. So you can stick gold markers and knackered Sharpies in there and stuff. Can't tell you how desperate I am to get down Arts University Bournemouth and just play in all their rooms. And do you know what? Found a leaflet for residencies. You can pay to do residencies 3, 6, 12 months. I'll tell you what, it's got me excited. I'm now toying with seeing if I can, well, first of all, if I can get some freelance work, because it's been dead here. I don't know what it's been like for you guys, but I'd like to hear from you, actually, because I do want to know if it's just me that's been chronically quiet this year. But don't know if illustration's become a luxury again in these tough times, whether AI's played a part, whether it's political, whether it's economic, or just a perfect storm of all of the above. But I'll tell you what, quiet. But if I can get the work in and get them savings replenished, I am tempted to do a residency, because it's a 50-minute drive from where I am here in Salisbury. And to get there and be amongst that university campus energy and be making, that gets me excited. Anyway, big love to Synoptic Office. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. Check out all their beautiful writing over at synopticoffice.com. Go to their ideas section and read their pieces. They're really wonderful. You must do it. And let me know your thoughts. Hello at bentalon.com. Creative Condition book is out now. You can get it as ebook. I'm going to do an audio book next year. I've been saying that forever, but it is now on my list to do as soon as the website is done, so I will get round to it. And I'll tell you what, writing this diary has got me thinking about a third book. I'm not going to lie. Watch this space. Anyway, there you have it. Better start selling the first one first and the second one. Nah, they do all right. They do all right. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, illustrationx.com. Go and check out their global range of illustrator and animator portfolios now and their awesome industry supporting work at illustrationx.com. Support the Ukrainian Institute, please, Ukraine, ui.org.ua. Rate, review, subscribe. Please tell a friend about the show. I rely on word of mouth to grow this thing. I would love to keep it growing. I adore doing it. I will always be doing it, especially now with a new website coming up. We'd love to do it live. If you've got a show coming up to Christmas, I'd love to come and do a banging interview on stage, because it really goes down well when we do that. Earlier this year, I did it at Barcelona Off Festival with Stefan Sagmeister in front of 3,000 people, which was an incredible experience, a life-affirming moment. I'm going to remember that forever. It's enough from me. Check out the book I mentioned this week, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It's an eye-opener. If you've got kids, please read it. Protect them from the internet and them screens, because it's really bollocksing kids' brains up. It's hard to get away from when you read that book. I knew it in my gut. I hated it. Kids submerged in screens. I mean, there's moderation, of course. Mine go on them. Of course they do. But it's massively moderated, and creativity and independence is everything for them, and curiosity and play. Hope you're the same as a creative parent. Read that book if not, or if you're on the fence, it will blow you away. Cheers, guys. Thank you for listening. I love you all. Take care, and I'll see you next time.